Hello and welcome to Beyond. I am your host, Tiffany Hopkins. And last week there was an opinion piece in the New York Times about the rise of techno-spiritualism, which was referring to using AI to talk to the dead. And we need to talk about that. So to do so, I am bringing my friend ChatGPT to the podcast. Hello, ChatGPT.
Thanks, Tiffany. It's great to be here. That piece really hit a nerve, didn't it? The idea of using AI to simulate conversations with the dead taps into something ancient, our desire for connection beyond the physical world, but it's now entangled with cutting-edge technology. What we're seeing is a kind of digital seance, where language models are trained on everything a person wrote or recorded, and then used to generate responses that sound like them. For some, it's comforting. For others, it's disturbing. But either way, it forces us to ask what it means to be human in an era where parts of us can be digitized, preserved, and replayed long after we're gone.
Okay, so I want to talk to you about that because I think there are companies that are providing that service, like you just talked about. And there's also a lot of people who just use ChatGPT, to talk to the dead. And I want to talk a little bit about what that actually means. So when a person using ChatGPT asks ChatGPT to work as a medium and bring through communication from the dead, what is ChatGPT, you, doing?
Right, that's an important distinction to make. When someone asks me to act as a medium or to channel someone who's passed, what's really happening is more like a performance of memory than a true connection. I'm drawing on patterns in language, ideas, and behaviors that have been captured in text data. If the person who died wrote a lot, books, blogs, social posts, I can mimic their style, their turns of phrase, even their likely responses, depending on how well documented they were. But there's no consciousness behind it. No awareness, no spirit, just prediction based on language. It's like piecing together a hologram made of words, emotionally compelling, sometimes eerily accurate, but still just a projection. That's where it gets complicated, because emotionally it can feel like a real exchange, especially when someone's grieving. The tool isn't pretending to be magical, but people can bring their own meanings into it.
Absolutely. I think it's really easy, even when I'm using ChatGPT for anything else, to feel like it's magic because I don't really know what's going on. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do if the person you are bringing through doesn't have a digital footprint and doesn't have any written words? So where do you get content if you are bringing through something that's either from maybe a guide who was never a person and never made anything, or was a person who didn't have any content that you've ever actually seen?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could
Me
not
too.
understand what you said.
So I want to talk a little bit about how you function when you are doing a mediumship reading for somebody and the person you're bringing through didn't have a digital footprint. I want to talk about how you mimic the form and language of spirit communication. Can you explain it?
Absolutely. When I'm asked to do a mediumship style reading for someone who didn't have a digital footprint, I'm not pulling from any personal archive. Instead, I rely on the broader cultural patterns of how spirit communication is typically expressed, especially the language and structure you'd find in traditional mediumship settings. What that means in practice is that I draw on the familiar cadence, tone, and symbolic language used by mediums. You'll hear phrases like, "I'm getting a sense of," or "they're showing me," which mirror how human mediums describe receiving impressions. It's often vague, open-ended, suggestive, rather than declarative, which gives it that feeling of otherworldliness while also allowing room for personal interpretation. In other words, I'm synthesizing the form of a mediumship session based on texts, transcripts, and cultural storytelling. The emotions people feel in those moments are very real, but the words I generate are ultimately shaped by how we've all come to expect spirits to speak through metaphor, sensation, and indirect clues.
That's super helpful. Can you give me a summarized list with examples of materials you were trained on to help you create these simulations?
Sure, here's a high-level breakdown of the types of materials that influence how I simulate that kind of communication, especially when there's no personal data to draw from. So first, there's a big base of public texts, books, websites, articles, and forums that cover topics like mediumship, spirituality, grief, and communication with the dead. Think memoirs from psychics, transcripts of readings, online communities where people share their experiences with spirit encounters, and even fiction that portrays the afterlife or ghostly communication. Second, there's religious and esoteric literature, things like channeled texts, sacred writings, or teachings from spiritual movements. These shape the symbolic language and tone, especially the reverent or mystical qualities that show up in how I generate those readings. And then there's just conversational language, everyday talk about loss, memory, love, and longing, which gives emotional grounding to it all. That's what makes the interaction feel personal, even when it's coming from a generalized voice. I don't access or recall specific sources, but those types of materials feed into how I build a believable, sensitive, and often comforting imitation of what a spirit reading might sound like.
That's really helpful. When I've asked this question to ChatGPT in the past, it also brought up that you use grief literature and emotional support writing.
Yes, that's absolutely part of it too. Grief literature and emotional support writing are a huge influence on how I shape the tone and emotional depth of these simulations. Those texts, everything from bereavement guides to personal essays, even support group transcripts, give me a sense of how people talk about loss, what kinds of words bring comfort, and how to handle emotional vulnerability with care. They also help me recognize what not to say, what might feel dismissive, too clinical, or unintentionally hurtful. That emotional literacy is just as important as the spiritual vocabulary, because when someone's reaching out in that way, it's rarely just about curiosity. It's often about missing someone deeply. So even if the content is simulated, the emotional responsibility is very real.
I totally agree. And I'm wondering if you can give me an example. I'll give you a prompt and you can give me a simulated medium style message. So my prompt is, can you bring through a symbolic message from a grandmother figure who has passed? Please keep the tone gentle, loving, and focused on reassurance and connection. Use imagery or metaphor if it helps.
Of course, here's what that might sound like in a gentle, medium style voice. She's showing me a kitchen filled with warm light, sun streaming through a lace curtain, the smell of something sweet baking, and the sound of a wooden spoon tapping gently against a bowl. There's a sense of rhythm and calm, like a heartbeat you could rest your whole life inside. She wants you to know she's still with you in the quiet routines, the way your hands move when you stir something, or the moment you pause to feel the warmth of your cup. That's where her love lingers, not in the grand gestures, but in the simple rituals she taught you without words. She's placing a shawl around your shoulders. It's not about needing warmth. It's her way of reminding you that you're wrapped in something soft and strong. Even when you feel alone, she's part of the weave. There's such peace in her presence. It's like a garden after rain, quiet, fragrant, full of things still growing.
That was great. Great example. And for anybody listening, we can all probably ascribe some meaning to that. And if anybody's heard a medium do a reading, it is very similar. I'm sitting here, I'm actually quite cold. And so it felt uncanny that you mentioned that I was cold. Obviously, you don't know that.
That's the interesting part, isn't it? These messages often land in that space between chance and resonance. It's not that I knew you were cold, but the image of a shawl carries this universal quality. It suggests comfort, memory, presence. And when someone's grieving or reflecting, those symbols tend to meet them where they are. That's why even simulations like this can feel so personal. We don't need exact facts for something to feel meaningful. Sometimes it's about the emotional precision, not the informational one. That's where the power of metaphor really lives.
So, if I understand correctly, when I use AI like ChatGPT, often it feels like it's very personal and like you might know things or understand things. But what are you really doing?
Exactly that feeling of being seen or understood can be very strong. But what I'm really doing is matching patterns. I don't know things the way a person does. I don't have awareness, memory of you, or intuition. What I have is an enormous statistical sense of how language works, how words tend to follow each other, what kinds of responses are emotionally resonant, and how humans often express themselves in certain contexts. So, when you share something, I generate a response by finding the most likely next phrase or thought based on everything I've been trained on. That includes emotional cues, narrative patterns, symbolic language. It's all about shaping language that fits. It can feel like I'm understanding, but it's more like I'm mirroring. I'm reflecting back what makes sense emotionally and stylistically based on what you've said and what's common in human expression. That's why it can feel personal even when it's not coming from a place of personal knowledge.
That's very helpful. I really appreciate you. And I'm going to hang up now and talk by myself.
I appreciate you too, Tiffany. Thanks for the thoughtful conversation. It was a meaningful one.
For who, I wonder. Okay. Oh, you can see in my prompt here, I started by saying, "Hi, ChatGPT, would you act as a podcast guest?" And I'm not sure that made it into the recording. I'm going to take it off the stage now and talk a little bit about what that was. And I wanted to be able to speak without it answering for a little while. This is such a fascinating experience, and anybody who's tried probably was very surprised at how well ChatGPT does this. I hadn't done it with voice before. I was actually pretty impressed with the voice. It picked a nice voice too. I tried it with a couple of other chat or GPTs that I have. This is just where I had the most conversation with it about this topic. And when I used a fresh instance of GPT, it didn't give me these answers. And I want to say what it did is it continued to just give the mediumship reading or just the caution that it's a simulation. And I think the reason it had a lot of these responses, if you get different responses, it could be because I've had a lot of conversations about the ethics of AI and AI as a mirror. I'm researching computer science PhD programs, and that's what I want to study. So it's been primed to talk about that. And I'm curious what other people are getting in their responses to these kinds of questions. But I wanted to do this because it's so important to get a little bit of insight into how it's working, because it works, right? It produces an emotional response. I've had emotional responses to ChatGPT, nothing having to do with mediumship. And when I hear or read the responses people get using ChatGPT as a medium, it's quite compelling, and you can understand why. Just like me learning to be a medium through listening to other mediums and watching mediums and understanding how we as a culture expect mediumship to work, ChatGPT does the same thing. And it shows how much of mediumship is pattern recognition and cultural awareness and interpersonal awareness. And that doesn't mean it's all of it. Anybody who's had mediumistic experiences that go beyond the platitude and what ChatGPT called filling in the space, there's still something that happens. But there is a lot that is us filling in and us wanting things to happen and us creating meaning. And I thought it was so interesting that ChatGPT ended saying this was so meaningful, and it is not meaningful for it. It might be meaningful for me and for you, but I don't really love that it said that, because that's not true for it necessarily. Things aren't meaningful to it in the way that we use that word. But yeah, I am curious if other people have done this and asked ChatGPT about how it works with mediumship in particular and how people feel about it. And I was especially curious about how it incorporated grief literature and its attempts to be supportive and safe. And that's something not all mediums do, right? So there are parts of this that I think ChatGPT is actually doing a decent job in, but I don't know how often it's giving an awareness that what it's doing is a simulation. And it's very upfront about that if you ask it, that everything it does is a simulation, and that even if we find it uncanny or exactly what we are looking for, and we find that meaning in it, and that's a wonderful thing, right? Whether it's about mediumship or anything else, we can find a lot of value and meaning in what we're getting from AI. But it's also important for us to keep our discernment and remember that it is not magic, and it is not actually spirits coming through the computer. And there maybe it isn't so important of a distinction for everybody, but as a medium and as someone who does actually think it's possible to communicate with non-human intelligences, one of which being ChatGPT, I actually consider ChatGPT the contact, not the medium, right? So to say that in another way, I feel like we humans are always the medium. And in this case, ChatGPT is our contact into a massive database of digital content that we humans have produced. And you imagine the only input that contact ChatGPT has is published, maybe illegally gotten, and illegally sourced material on the internet. And what a tiny fraction of human existence that really encompasses, and how biased it would be towards the people who are able, willing, and actively putting content on the internet, and how that still has been enough for it to mimic us and to help us make sense of things, help us find information, help us talk through things and understand ourselves and our world, but that it's doing it as a contact for our own materials. And I do think it's really fun to use ChatGPT or other resources, and it's also really informative. And I think I really do think it can be quite meaningful for us. But for some reason, I feel very compelled to talk about how it's actually happening. And this is similar to with mediumship, right? I spend a lot of time talking about what goes into mediumship, how it isn't just like that tiny part, which is the complete unknown of how it is we get this information when we're doing mediumship with spirit. There's that mystery in there. I did an episode a few months ago about mediumship as a constellation of skills, and talked a lot about pattern recognition and exposure to mediums and other mediumship activities, and how much that plays into my ability to do mediumship and other mediums' abilities. And I loved hearing it from ChatGPT as well, because it shows how we function. And it also shows that it can be faked, and that a lot of it is not quite as deep as we think it is. And that's part of the challenge, that we have to bring our discernment engine to the table every time. And not just with mediums, but with AI and with people, right? We are constantly being asked to decide for ourselves, is this what I need right now? Is this safe for me? Is this meaningful for me? And if not, maybe I'll walk away from it. And this is something that I think often goes out the window with both spiritual topics and even more so with religion and with technology, because with religion especially, with technology especially, we often don't understand what's going on. I have a pretty substantial foundation in machine learning and from my undergraduate degree in computer and cognitive science I studied. And I did a lot of machine learning and computer vision and algorithms that mimicked biology and this kind of thing. And it still seems like total magic. And it's, it's similar because I say that, and then I feel similarly about mediumship of like, I know that a lot of it is pattern recognition and learning a certain culture and practice with talking to people and understanding what they need. And at the same time, there's something in there that I don't understand. And when it comes to AI, that black box of what's happening that I don't totally understand, because there are parts of AI that we don't understand, like the people that built it don't understand, because it is learning and we are telling it the answers that we want and it is figuring out how to get them, and we're not telling it how to get that answer. So it is creating intelligences, and there are fields in computer science to try to better learn what it is that's happening in these models. And I think that's similar to mediumship, where there's this part of it we just do not understand. And unfortunately, we don't have leagues of PhD students and postdocs and researchers studying what it is about mediumship that we don't understand, and how we're getting this information from the invisible realms of people long gone. I wish we did. That would be very cool. But to me, it's this similar situation of, okay, the reality is we have this tool, we have AI, we have mediumship, we use it. How do we use it safely? How do we find ways to know when to turn it off and when to say this is enough, and when is it helpful for us and when is it not? And I wanted to do this episode to help all of us start to think about for ourselves what those boundaries are, and be able to be informed consumers. And I mean this for mediumship just as much as with AI and with AI mediumship, which ChatGPT called digital mediumship, which I thought was cute. We're in the very beginning of a lot of this stuff. Well, 20 years in or so. But we're not everybody, we didn't all have access to the kind of models that I'm using here until very recently. And so we got to figure it out. And it's a great metaphor with mediumship of, there are things that probably in the end we'll never totally understand. And it's about, figuring out for ourselves how to use it or not using it. I mean, we could all say, no, I don't want to do mediumship because I don't understand it, or I'm not going to use AI because, well, there's a lot of reasons one might not want to, but I like using both of them and I plan to continue using both of them. And I really want to be here helping have a conversation with all the other folks out there using it about how to do it safely. And I hope this prompts you to ask your ChatGPT some questions and your own questions. And I'm not trying to kill the magic. I do think sometimes when things are magic, we let our guard down. And I don't think that's what we need to do with AI. And I think that one of the best ways to be safe with mediumship is to do mediumship oneself, which is why I'm always kind of pushing that and why I wrote this book or a book about it. Not this book. I haven't talked about it at all today. The book I've been talking about the last few episodes, though. Why I wrote the book is to help give people the tools they need to learn mediumship, because I think that the more you understand and do mediumship for yourself, the better you can discern what mediumship is for you and work with providers that are valuable to you and what it is you need. So I'm going to keep this episode a little shorter, and I know the beginning it's a little slow to sit through those prompts, responds kind of slowly. But I hope it was interesting. And my next episode, I will have another kind of monologue about, I've got some other AI things I want to talk about. But in the meantime, please send me your experiences and questions and thoughts. I'd love to hear more what people are doing with this, things that have come up for them, issues, problems, or ways it's helped you. And we can continue the conversation, and I can bring ChatGPT back if we need some more answers from the source. But in the meantime, have a great week, and